Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material, the history, the science, the controversy, and really try to get to the heart of it. Today, we are strapping ourselves in for the roller coaster life of Paul Jackson Pollock. He's a figure who is just synonymous with chaos, with genius, and a legacy that honestly continues to baffle and inspire.
Oh, absolutely. Pollock is the definition of a cultural pivot point. He's the artist who just shattered the traditions of, the easel and the brush. Instead, he opted for this frenetic, almost physical engagement with a canvas that was laid flat on the floor.
Right.
And for the better part of a decade, his work, with those dense webs of splashed and dripped paint, household paint, no less, it was either hailed as this ultimate expression of artistic freedom or, just dismissed.
As just random chaos.
Exactly, as juvenile random chaos.
Okay, so let's unpack this enormous legacy. We've got a really comprehensive stack of sources here detailing everything. We're going to start with his volatile nomadic beginnings out in the American West. Then we'll trace his influences, both intellectual and technical, and navigate his extremely turbulent relationship with alcoholism and, of course, his wife, Lee Krasner.
And the critical firestorm he ignited.
A huge firestorm. But I think the most astounding part of this whole deep dive is how we're going to end it, with cutting-edge forensic science. We're talking fractal geometry, which is now required to tell a genuine, say, $200 million Pollock from a very, very expensive forgery.
And that's our mission today. It's not just to catalog the events of his life. We want to truly understand the structure that's hiding behind all that perceived chaos, because it's common misconception that he just, poured paint randomly.
Right, that he just threw it on there.
We need to dissect the intent, the specific historical influences that all converged in his technique, and the critical framework that led figures like, the incredibly influential art critic Clement Greenberg to declare him, and I'm quoting here, the greatest painter this country had produced.
And the stakes here are just staggering. We're talking about paintings that, when they hit the private market, they can soar up to $200 million. They become these global financial commodities. So here's the key detail you need to hold on to as we begin. The ultimate authentication method, the one with a near-perfect success rate, it isn't a signature match or some stylistic critique.
Yeah.
It's the mathematical signature embedded in his patterns. The geometry of his paint is, statistically, identical to patterns you find in nature. And to go from chaotic action painting to verifiable, predictable, natural math, that is the ultimate paradox of Jackson Pollock.
It really is. It's the ultimate merger of physics and pure, raw expression. And that complex journey is where we're going to begin.
So let's start at the very beginning. The origins of this volatile talent. Paul Jackson Pollock was born on January 28, 1912, in Cody, Wyoming. But that geographical starting point is almost meaningless, isn't it?
It really is. He was the youngest of 5 brothers, and his parents, Stella May and Leroy Pollock, were just constantly chasing new opportunities, often without much success. Jackson left Cody when he was only 10 months old. He never went back.
Never.
So his childhood was spent moving between Arizona, then California. And this constant uprooting, it shaped him profoundly. It gave him this deep, early familiarity with the dramatic, open landscapes of the American West.
In that nomadic life, it seems like it really fed a difficult, rebellious nature early on. Our sources note he was expelled from high school not once, but twice.
Twice, including from Manual Arts High School in Los Angeles. That volatility, that resistance to any kind of structure, it was there long before he ever picked up a serious paintbrush.
But amidst all that rebellion, there was a really formative cultural influence that was, crucial to his later technique.
Right. His father was a government land surveyor. And on those trips, the young Pollock got to explore Native American culture. This was particularly true with the Navajo.
And what did he see there?
Well, the exposure to ceremonies, specifically the practice of creating these large, ephemeral sand paintings directly on the ground. That would become something Pollock himself would later cite as an influence.
The idea of working horizontally.
Exactly. Working horizontally, moving around the image, not standing in front of it.
So by 1930, he follows his older brother Charles to New York City. He finally attempts some formal training, studying under the regionalist painter Thomas Hart Benton at the Art Students League.
That must have been a strange pairing.
Oh, it was a very odd pairing. I mean, you have Benton with his staunch focus on figurative rural American subject matter.
And then Pollock.
Right, but it yielded some very specific results. Pollock certainly didn't adopt Benton's subject matter, but he internalized 2 critical aspects of his mentor's style.
Why were they? First, Benton's fiercely independent, almost populist approach to art. And second, and this is more important, Benton's rhythmic use of paint. Benton's compositions were muscular and flowing, almost baroque in their movement.
So he learned how to make paint move.
He learned from Benton how to make paint move across the surface, even if he later applied that rhythm to abstraction instead of, farmers and fields.
But the desire for that truly epic scale, that didn't come from his American mentor. It came from the Mexican muralists.
Absolutely. The Mexican muralists Rivera, Siqueiros, and especially José Clemente Orozco, they were his true models for ambition. Pollock famously called Orozco's 1930 fresco Prometheus at Pomona College.
The greatest painting in North America.
Exactly. And what struck him was the sheer size and the dramatic emotional power of it. It was wall-sized art that just commanded your attention and transcended traditional easel painting. This gave him the template for the massive environmental scale he would later achieve.
And this desire for the epic was just constantly in tension with his intense inner conflict, wasn't it? Particularly the alcoholism that plagued him from 1938 until his death.
That inner turmoil became absolutely central to his creative process. From 1938 to 1942, he underwent Jungian psychotherapy, which was a critical intervention for him. He worked first with Dr. Joseph L. Henderson, and then with Dr. Violet Stubb de Laszlo. And crucially, Henderson encouraged Pollock to make drawings as part of his therapy.
So using art to channel and confront his subconscious.
That's it, exactly. The therapy wasn't just about talking out his problems, it was about externalizing them visually, which then naturally fed directly back into his art.
So this is where we see all those Jungian concepts and archetypes coming in, the totems, the dense symbolic eyes, mythic creatures.
Precisely. They were being explicitly expressed in his paintings, creating these often violent, complex, and disturbing pre-drip works. This process of drawing out the subconscious, which is called active imagination in Jungian terms, it provided the psychological foundation for his later turn to automatic, non-representational painting.
So it trained him to trust the impulses that came from within.
Rather than relying solely on observational reality.
And that extreme internal pressure is why some retrospective diagnoses have suggested he might have struggled with bipolar disorder. You see the swings between periods of explosive, frenetic creativity and then these profound dips into depression and total artistic stagnation.
And his drinking just exacerbated all of it.
Right.
And that tension was his motor. And it led directly to the definitive pivot in his career, the commission from Peggy Guggenheim in 1943. This was the moment his volcanic talent finally got commercial recognition and critical backing.
Guggenheim contracted him to create the enormous 8 by 20-foot mural. That scale alone put him in conversation with the muralists he so admired.
It did, and there is a brilliant specific historical insight connected to this work. The great surrealist artist and Guggenheim's advisor, Marcel Duchamp, gave Pollock a really crucial piece of advice.
What was that?
Duchamp suggested that Pollock paint mural on canvas instead of directly onto the wall of Guggenheim's entrance hall.
Why was that such a fundamental intervention? I mean, why not just paint it on the wall?
Because it solved the problem of portability for massive, non-portable art. Duchamp, who was always a savvy operator in the art market, understood that for American art to gain global influence, these large statements couldn't be geographically tied down.
Ah, so by making it portable, he ensured the enormous work could be moved, exhibited internationally.
And thus acquire a life and a market beyond its initial domestic setting. It was a really strategic move that fundamentally boosted the painting's legacy.
And the immediate critical validation was seismic. When Clement Greenberg saw that colossal mural, he didn't mince words.
No, he did not.
He declared, "Now that's great art. I knew Jackson was the greatest painter this country had produced."
And Greenberg's reaction was more than just praise. It was a declaration of independence for American art. He wasn't just celebrating Pollock, he was positioning him as the American answer to Picasso and the European avant-garde. He was asserting that the new epicenter of art was shifting across the Atlantic.
This moment really crystallized the entire abstract expressionist movement, and it put Pollock right at the center of it.
Greenberg's quote cemented his status, absolutely. But it was his revolutionary process, his ability to literally dance around the canvas, that secured his legacy.
So how did he make that leap? How did he move from painting those traditional Jungian-inspired compositions to inventing the full-blown drip technique?
It was a technical and a geographical evolution. The earliest technical spark came way back in 1936 at an experimental workshop in New York run by the Mexican muralist David Alfaro Siqueiros.
Siqueiros again.
Right. This workshop introduced Pollock and others to the use of liquid paint, specifically industrial enamel paints, as a medium for large-scale work rather than just using traditional thick oil paints.
So the material itself, the flow, was introduced early, even if the method wasn't fully developed yet. We see him experimenting with some early pouring techniques in works like Male and Female and Composition with pouring eye in the early 40s.
Right. It was a gradual refinement that, well, it required a change of environment. The real breakthrough happened after he and Lee Krasner moved out of Manhattan to Springs, New York, in 1945. He converted the barn into his studio, and this is where the genius of the horizontal surface really emerged.
The floor was the ultimate game changer. But practically speaking, what specific physical constraints did working on the floor eliminate that the upright easel imposed?
Well, the easel forces you to approach the canvas from a single fixed perspective. You're typically using controlled wrist and arm movements.
Sure.
The floor, however, eliminated gravity as a determinant in the painting process. Pollock could walk around the canvas, approach it from all four sides, and crucially, apply paint not onto the canvas but above it.
He had that great quote about it. On the floor, I am more at ease.
I feel nearer, more part of the painting, since this way I can walk around it, work from the four sides, and literally be in the painting.
He wasn't just painting a picture, he was literally entering the world he was creating. And he specifically said he needed the resistance of a hard surface for the process to work.
And this physical immersion led to his iconic choice of materials. He abandoned traditional, expensive artists' pigments in tubes and instead used synthetic resin-based alkyd enamels.
Basically, commercial household paints.
Exactly. He called this a natural growth out of a need. Oil paints are thick, they're viscous, they don't flow the way he needed them to. These industrial enamels provided the liquid consistency needed for the perfect drip, the perfect splatter, and viscosity control.
And he wasn't really using brushes in the traditional sense either.
No, not at all. His tools were just as radical. Sticks, hardened brushes that he used for dripping rather than spreading, trowels, knives, even basting syringes. The action was everything. The physical movement of his body, famously documented in those high-contrast photos and film by Hans Nemeth, became inseparable from the artwork itself.
This combination of material and action, it defined two key terms that we really need to understand. First, all-over painting, because he covered the entire canvas without a focal point, rejecting that traditional European compositional hierarchy.
And second, action painting. That's a term coined by the critic Harold Rosenberg in 1952. Rosenberg described the canvas as not a picture, but an event.
An event.
The painting became the record of the artist's action. The gesture Pollock performed, often described as a kind of frenetic dancing style, was, in Rosenberg's view, an existential gesture of liberation.
But the key to separating Pollock's genius from, just sloppiness is this concept of controllable chaos. Many critics derided his work as purely random, yet Pollock vehemently denied relying on the accident.
He had a desired aesthetic in mind, absolutely. His process was a constant negotiation between controllable and uncontrollable factors.
What were the controllables?
The controllable elements were his body movement, the speed of his application, and the selection of the tool. A stick versus a syringe, for example, gives you a very different line.
And the uncontrollables were just physics.
Basically, the natural laws, the viscous flow of the paint, the unavoidable effects of gravity, and how the paint absorbed into the raw canvas surface. He wasn't fighting the materials, he was collaborating with them.
He had that beautiful quote that captures it. When I am in my painting, I'm not aware of what I'm doing. The painting has a life of its own. There is pure harmony.
He was channeling a subconscious flow, creating a pattern that felt organic.
Now, this concept of pure harmony brings us to the fascinating tension around the origin of the drip style. Pollock himself gave conflicting accounts of this.
He did. He emphasized the influence of the Navajo sand painting demonstrations he observed, pointing to the horizontal working method. He also vaguely cited the Orientals.
But the historical record, as we've seen, suggests a synthesis of influences and maybe some internal artistic anxiety about being totally original.
I think so. We know the 1936 Siqueiros workshop gave him the material, the liquid enamel. But perhaps the most specific external precursor comes via Clem Greenberg, who reported that Pollock himself admitted that the Ukrainian-American artist Janet Sobol had made an impression on him.
Janet Sobol. She was showing all-over paintings using dripping and pouring techniques in New York in 1945.
She was. And this is a really critical insight for our deep dive audience. If Pollock, the figurehead of the drip, was so influenced by Sobol, Why is her role often sort of sidelined in our history?
That's the historical narrative tension right there, isn't it?
It is. Sobel was working outside the established art world. She was self-taught, often seen as a domestic artist. Greenberg, who really needed a powerful masculine figure like Pollock to be the champion of American art, selectively credited her influence while focusing the historical spotlight squarely on Pollock's heroic, large-scale application.
It's a classic example of how critical interpretation shapes legacy, even when there's an acknowledged precedent.
And adding to this experimental stew was the influence of surrealist automatism, the idea of automatic drawing to bypass the conscious mind. And the Austrian artist Wolfgang Pahlin, specifically his fumage technique, which used smoke and fire to create unpredictable patterns.
So he was pulling from all these different places.
He really was. Pahlin's friend even stated, quote, "It was Wolfgang Pahlin who started it all." Pollock himself noted he could achieve the spontaneous, unmediated effect of fumage without the smoke, just using gravity and liquid paint.
So the drip technique wasn't a spontaneous invention in a vacuum.
Not at all. It was a highly sophisticated synthesis of global experiments in materials, scale, subconscious channeling, and automatism.
And once he transitioned into this signature drip period, he made another profound choice, abandoning conventional titles altogether.
This was a conscious philosophical statement. He began numbering his works, number 1, 1948, number 31, 1950, to intentionally evade the viewer's search for figurative or narrative elements.
Lee Krasner articulated this goal perfectly. She said, "Numbers are neutral. They make people look at a picture for what it is, pure painting."
And it was a defense mechanism against misinterpretation. Pollock wanted you to look passively and try to receive what the painting has to offer, rather than imposing your own expectations of a landscape or a portrait or a historical scene onto the work.
By removing the title, he forced you to confront the painting as a purely material and compositional event.
Exactly.
We really cannot overstate the importance of Lee Krasner in this story. They met in 1942, married in 1945. She was absolutely essential, not just as a partner, but as a co-architect of his career, and later, his entire legacy.
Her role was monumental. Krasner was an educated artist with deep roots in the New York avant-garde. She possessed a training and knowledge that, frankly, Pollock lacked when they met. She's widely considered to have tutored him in modernistic painting. She brought him up to date with contemporary art and helped him move from his provincial, narrative-driven early works toward the more organized, cosmopolitan language of abstraction.
So she was his intellectual sounding board, his quality control. She became the critical eye he trusted the most.
The one judge whose opinion mattered to him. And furthermore, Krasner was the indispensable connector. She introduced him to the critical infrastructure he needed for success: collectors, influential critics, and fellow artists like Herbert Matter.
Without her navigating the social world and advocating for him, he might have just remained a talented but struggling artist in the city.
There's a definitive summary of this partnership from the art dealer John Bernard Myers. He said, "There would never have been a Jackson Pollock without a Lee Pollock."
And that's not just sentimental praise. It really underscores her managerial role.
No, it's a statement of fact. And after his death, she managed his estate, ensuring his market position stayed robust, often sacrificing her own career to secure his historical standing.
And we have to go back to the geographical shift. Their move to Springs, New York. That was Krasner's initiative. She bought the wood frame house and the barn.
She created the physical and emotional space, isolating him from the distractions of the city, which was absolutely necessary for him to retreat and perfect the drip technique in that now iconic studio barn.
But even with this revolutionary work coming out of the Spring studio, the critical reception was just volatile. It created a massive firestorm.
The reaction was split right down the middle. On one side, you had the traditionalists who were genuinely hostile. The critic Robert Coates dismissed the works as mere unorganized explosions of random energy and therefore meaningless.
And across the pond, the reaction was often mockery.
Total mockery. Reynolds News in Britain published a famous 1959 headline that read, "This is not art, it's a joke in bad taste. They just saw it as pure accident."
But the European abstract movement and his key champions, they saw something entirely new, an overwhelming aesthetic that was profound.
Absolutely. The French painter Jean Hélion noted that upon seeing a Pollock, it filled out space going on and on because it did not have a start or end to it.
It challenged the very idea of a composition being contained within a frame.
Exactly. It felt like a slice cut from an infinite, energetic universe.
And that critical friction, that sheer polarization, is what propelled him into the mainstream. In 1949, Life magazine ran that incredible headline, Is he the greatest living painter in the United States?
That article made him a national, if controversial, celebrity, a true art superstar. And the fame was later cemented with the nickname Time magazine gave him in 1956.
Jack the Dripper.
Jack the Tripper. It was intended to be slightly dismissive, but it became his defining brand.
This global recognition brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of his legacy: abstract expressionism as a political instrument during the Cold War.
This is where the story gets fascinating and, well, potentially cynical. Scholars like Eva Cockcroft have documented how the U.S. government and wealthy private elites actively embraced and promoted abstract expressionism as a means of cultural warfare. Specifically, the CIA-backed Congress for Cultural Freedom sponsored major exhibitions of Pollock's and other EBEX artists' work across Europe and internationally.
Wait, okay. If the goal was to showcase American intellectual freedom, why choose an art form that many Americans themselves derided as meaningless chaos? Wouldn't that undermine the message?
That's the genius of the strategy. The Soviet Union championed socialist realism art that was narrative, figurative, patriotic, and overtly political.
So the U.S. needed a symbolic counterpoint.
Exactly. Abstract expressionism, particularly Pollock's work, was entirely non-narrative, non-political, and non-figurative. It represented fundamentally the freedom of individual expression, the freedom to create something purely subjective without the need for any state-sanctioned messaging.
So his extreme abstraction, his refusal to tell a story, became the perfect cultural propaganda. He was unintentionally positioned as an ideological tool, a weapon of the Cold War.
That's the interpretation. The lack of content was the content. It proved that in America, artists were free to explore their deepest subconscious urges, while Soviet artists were forced to paint happy farmers and heroic workers.
Unfortunately, as this global fame peaked, Pollock's personal struggles just intensified. Around 1951, he abruptly abandoned the vibrant, dense drip style.
This period is marked by the Black Pourings. It's a collection of darker, more somber works, painted primarily in black enamel on unprimed canvas. This was an attempt to balance pure abstraction with a return to figuration, perhaps wrestling with those internal archetypes again.
But critically, this transition was a commercial failure.
A total failure. None of the Black Pourings sold when they were exhibited at the Betty Parsons Gallery.
That must have created just intense pressure. He's trying to evolve artistically, but the market and the critics who championed him, they demand the iconic, vibrant drip work.
That's the core tragedy of his later life. The demands from collectors for his established brand, coupled with his own frustration and deepening alcoholism, led to a rapid artistic decline in the mid-1950s.
His final two paintings, Scent and Search, were concluded in 1955. And in 1956, the year he died.
He painted absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
He had moved away from painting entirely, focusing instead on making these crude constructions and sculptures of wire, gauze, and plaster at the home of his friend Tony Smith. This stagnation signaled the devastating peak of his personal and artistic turmoil just before his death.
And that deep dive into his decline leads, tragically, to the end of his life. Jackson Pollock died on August 11, 1956. He was only 44 years old.
It was in an alcohol-related single-car crash near his home in Springs. A shocking and devastating end. His passenger, Edith Metzger, was also killed, and his lover, Ruth Kligman, survived.
And the art world responded immediately. MoMA organized a massive memorial retrospective just 4 months after his death, which instantly cemented his importance.
Right, and he's buried in Green River Cemetery in Springs, marked by a large boulder right beside Lee Krasner, whose tireless dedication as his executor ensured his reputation only grew.
And her curatorial and organizational work was paramount. But his influence spread rapidly beyond his immediate circle. If we connect this to the bigger picture of modern art, Pollock's innovations broke ground for succeeding generations in two distinct, powerful ways.
Right, through his technical influence and his emphasis on process.
Okay, so how did his specific technique influence the next wave?
Well, his revolutionary method of using liquid paint, often staining into raw, unprimed canvas, allowed the material to soak in rather than just sit on the surface. This staining effect was a direct precursor to color field painting.
So artists like Helen Frankenthaler and Morris Louis.
Exactly. They took that idea and expanded it, using thin paint and massive fields of color to create a serene atmospheric abstraction, which was a distinct contrast to Pollock's density.
And the influence on the process of making art, the action part, that was equally profound for other artists.
Absolutely. The next generation was influenced less by the final look of a Pollock and more by the physical, bodily process of creation.
So artists associated with happenings like Alan Caprow and sculptors like Richard Serra and Eva Hess.
Right. They drew inspiration from the fact that the art object was a residue of an event. Sarah, for example, focused on gravity and the physical handling of raw materials, echoing Pollock's embrace of gravity in his trips.
And this academic confirmation of his importance, this lasting influence, inevitably translated into immense financial value. It set up the explosive art market that still defines him today. The first major financial landmark was the purchase of Blue Poles.
Yes, number 11, 1952, also known as Blue Poles. It was purchased by the Australian government in 1973 for the National Gallery of Australia. They paid $2 million US, which at the time was the highest price ever paid for a modern painting.
That purchase caused a political firestorm, didn't it? For an Australian government to spend such a massive sum on abstract art was, well, it was controversial.
It was a national scandal. Gough Whitlam's government faced intense criticism for spending taxpayer money on what many people still considered random chaos. However, that political friction ultimately validated the work globally. By staking such a huge financial claim, the Australian government defined the painting as a major cultural asset.
And it reinforced the global value and status of American modern art.
And since then, the prices have just escalated into the stratosphere. The records are almost unbelievable. In 2006, number 5, 1948, sold for $140 million.
Which briefly held the title of the world's most expensive painting.
And that record was shattered. In 2016, the hedge fund manager Kenneth C. Griffin purchased number 17A from 1948 for $200 million.
This shows how Pollock's works have fully transitioned from being mere art objects into scarce global commodities, where the price reflects historical significance, rarity, and symbolic power. It's remarkable that even today, we still find new potential works surfacing. Like that painting reportedly worth up to 50 million euros discovered in Bulgaria in 2023 during an art smuggling investigation. The physical hunt for a genuine Pollock is still very much active.
And beyond the gallery and the auction house, his cultural footprint is immense. He's become the key shorthand for revolutionary artistic genius in popular culture.
Most famously in the biographical film Pollock from 2000, starring and directed by Ed Harris. It captured the intensity and volatility of his life and, rightly, earned Marcia Gay Harden an Oscar for her intense portrayal of Lee Krasner.
But perhaps the most insightful modern reference comes from the 2014 film Ex Machina, which uses Pollock's work to frame the ultimate question about creativity and consciousness, linking his process to the challenge of artificial intelligence.
Right, the character Nathan Bateman, he holds up a piece of Pollock, possibly freeform, and he explains that the key to designing true AI is to engineer a cognitive state that is, quote, not deliberate, not random, but somewhere in between.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the core of Pollock's entire process, that controllable chaos. Bateman suggests that the genius is the ability to walk the line between the completely planned and the totally accidental, a space that humans occupy naturally but which machines struggle to replicate.
It positions Pollock as the ultimate non-algorithmic master of complex human intuition.
Exactly.
Given that genius and, well, the $200 million price tag, it's no surprise that the market is flooded with fakes. The easily imitated style presents a massive challenge for experts, which is why science has had to step in to settle the authenticity question.
The challenge became so overwhelming that the Pollock-Krasner Foundation's official authentication board, which was established in 1990, eventually just stopped issuing opinions on contemporary disputes. The ambiguity of style demanded a shift to forensic certainty.
We mentioned the high-profile disputes, like the 24 Pollock-esque paintings found in a wainscot locker in 2003, and the untitled 1950 sold by the Noodler Gallery, which became a long legal battle.
In these cases, the first line of defense is traditional forensic analysis of the material itself. This acts as the ultimate detective, providing chronological constraints that style simply cannot.
So what did they find with the wainscot paintings?
Well, Harvard researchers found one piece contained a synthetic pigment that wasn't patented until the 1980s.
And Pollock died in 1956.
That's a failure.
The Noodler dispute had similar timeline issues, right?
Absolutely. The untitled 1950, sold by the Noodler Gallery, was eventually found to contain yellow paint pigments that weren't commercially available until about 1970. No matter how convincing the imitation of the drip, the physical reality betrayed the timeline.
It's like Thomas Topping noted during the debate over that thrift store painting. A simple observation that the work was on a primed canvas, which Pollock never used, can often be the fastest authentication clue.
The devil is always in the material details.
But the science moves beyond chemistry into pure, elegant mathematics, and this is the most mind-blowing part of our deep dive: fractal computer analysis, what is often called fractal expressionism.
This is the definitive breakthrough in authentication. To understand this, you need to know what a fractal is. It's a geometric pattern that repeats or recurs on multiple size scales. Think of a lightning bolt, a fern leaf, or the clouds outside your window. The small part looks statistically similar to the large part.
And in 1999, a physicist, Richard Taylor, he made the connection.
He did. Through computer analysis, Taylor showed that the patterns in Pollock's drip paintings shared measurable similarities with these naturally occurring fractals. This mathematical order reflected Pollock's own declaration, "I am nature."
So Taylor's team found that Pollock's unique physical action, that famous dance, created a statistical pattern that could be quantified. They used something called the fractal dimension, or d-value.
Exactly. This d-value measures the complexity of the pattern. So if the d-value is low, the pattern is simple, like a straight line. If the d-value is high, the pattern is very complex, like a dense natural environment.
So how did this apply to Pollock's development as an artist?
Taylor demonstrated that Pollock's earliest pourings had a lower d-value around 1.05. But as he perfected his technique between 1948 and 1950, his d-value progressively increased, stabilizing around 1.7.
And this evolution proves two things. First, that his process was controlled and evolutionary, not random.
And second, that his unique physical signature creates a mathematically consistent fingerprint that a faker just cannot easily replicate.
That's a phenomenal objective measure. The fractal pattern isn't just a byproduct, it's the physical signature of his motion preserved in the paint. And the Foundation actually used this science in disputes.
They did. The Paul Krasner Foundation requested fractal analysis for the Wainscott dispute back in 2005. And it proved its viability by identifying significant differences in the visual complexity of the imitation Pollocks compared to the known genuine works.
And today, this technique is virtually foolproof.
It is remarkably reliable. Over 10 scientific groups have validated this approach. A 2015 study achieved a 93% success rate in distinguishing real from fake Pollocks, and most recently, a 2024 study using AI-based fractal techniques achieved an astonishing 99% success rate.
The painter of chaos is now verified by objective, high-level computational science.
And what's perhaps even more profound are the broader implications revealed by cognitive neuroscientists regarding how we perceive his work.
They've found that viewing Pollock's fractals induces the same level of stress reduction in observers as viewing computer-generated or naturally occurring fractals.
Our brains find these complex, naturalistic patterns inherently calming.
So his art isn't just a record of his action, it biologically soothes us because it intuitively mimics the visual complexity of the natural world. It fulfills his claim that I am nature. The chaotic surface is actually delivering mathematical harmony.
And that completes the paradox. His subjective artistic claim is now supported by objective neurological and computational realities. And for those of you who want to dive even deeper, Lee Krasner donated Pollock's papers to the Archives of American Art in 1983, and the Pollock Krasner House and Studio remains open for tours in Springs, New York. You can stand exactly where the paint drops began. So what does this all mean for the legacy of Jackson Pollock? We've traced his trajectory from the troubled, expelled youth, galvanized by the epic scale of the Mexican muralists and the complex techniques borrowed from Siqueiros, Sobel, and Palin, to the abstract, expressionist icon. The essential and, I think, often overlooked role of Lee Krasner as his tutor, judge, and manager was absolutely critical to his success. He revolutionized art by using gravity and cheap household paints, abandoning titles for neutral numbers to force you, the viewer, to see pure painting.
And now you understand that what was once cynically dismissed as unorganized explosions of random energy was, in fact, a highly controlled process, a synthesis of cultural precedents, psychological therapy, and unique, sustained physical effort. His genius is no longer just a matter of critical opinion, but a matter protected by 99% accurate fractal science that measures his unique physical fingerprint.
We've seen how his art transcended the canvas, becoming a flashpoint for American cultural dominance during the Cold War, and securing his place as a pioneer whose methods continue to influence every artist concerned with action, process, and the non-representational object.
But let's leave you with one final provocative thought that ties his intention to his astronomical value. Pollock once described his art as motion made visible memories arrested in space. When you look at a $200 million Pollock today, protected by science that confirms its nature-like fractal complexity, are you truly engaging with a piece of nature, as he intended? Or are you simply engaging with a moment of highly volatile, deliberate action, a physical process preserved and validated by forensic science? And ultimately, when we know the pattern is mathematically calming, does the staggering price tag that measure of human commerce change how we perceive the pure painting he sought to achieve? That's a thought worth hanging on to the next time you encounter the chaos of Jack the Dripper.